On the agenda, it says Moon River, a case study for Asian carp management. I'm going to talk about Moon River, but first I want to talk about some of the things that MDWFP is involved in. I'm very lucky to be part of an agency whose goal is to conserve and enhance our natural resource. And so anytime I get a chance to brag about the work that we do, I like to take that opportunity. And so I'm going to start off today by talking about some of the things that we're doing as an agency. I know I hear on almost a daily basis, about them jumping carp. What are y'all going to do about them, And so just to ensure everyone out there that we are doing what we can. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the involvements that we're part of. And this is kind of a summary of what I'm going to talk about today and some of the things that MDWFP is involved in as far as monitoring the Asian carp populations that are already here and then researching the effects of Asian carp on our water bodies. Then we're going to talk about educating the general public about Asian carp and then working to stop their expansion, encouraging the harvest. And then we dabble a little bit in establishing markets and then also working with other agencies. So to get started, as far as monitoring the existing carp populations, in the past we've teamed up with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to collect water samples looking at eDNA or environmental DNA, which is tiny amounts of DNA content in water samples. And so we do a genetic analysis on those water samples to detect the presence of carp DNA. We did that on we helped U.S. Fish and Wildlife do that on the Tin-Time waterway. We also annually, our fisheries biologist for the agency will go out and will sample a number of different lakes using commercial gear, gill nets in particular, sampling the commercial fishery and assessing those populations. And there's times where we run into populations of Asian carp and we're able to look at the presence and the relative abundance of Asian carp in those populations. And over years worth of gathering this data, we're able to see if there's any change in the fish community, like Quentin talked about, and see if like I said, the fish communities are changing over time based on Asian carp presence. With the USGS, National Aquatic Nuisance Species Database, we get reports of new sightings of Asian carp and new populations in water bodies, and we'll go out and we'll sample some of those water bodies and see if they're really present, and if they are, we'll record that information and keep up with it, and we'll submit it to the USGS where they can keep up with an accurate distribution database. We have two people that sit on a few different committees that deal not specifically with Asian carp, but with aquatic nuisance species, and Asian carp are definitely one of the top on the list that they deal with. Dennis Rickey, who's my immediate supervisor, sits on two panels that deal with aquatic nuisance species, the Mississippi River Basin panel and the Gulf and South Atlantic Regional panel. We have Larry Pugh here, who's here today. He is part of the LMRCC technical committee. They don't deal directly with aquatic nuisance species, but a lot of what they do is help with finding research projects and finding funding for those research projects, and a lot of the times it's here lately especially, it has to do with Asian carp. As far as some of the research on the effects of Asian carp, the first thing Nathan Aycock presented on earlier today is the effects of Asian carp on the sports fish populations on some of our oxbows. And we got some good information from before the flood of 2011 and after the flood of 2011. So that's one project that we've worked on. We have another project, Asian Carp Movement on Pickwick. That's a new project that's just now getting underway. Our Northeast Regional Fisheries Biologist will be teaming up with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service once again to implant 20 adult silver carp on Pickwick Lake. Well, they'll be it enables our agency to monitor the spatial distribution and the movement of silver carp in Pickwick, or a 36-mile stretch of the Tin-Time waterway. And we'll have a better idea then of what we need to do as far as slowing down their expansion. And then once again, also our information from our fall electrofishing samples that our regional biologists do on an annual basis, where they'll go out and sample particular water bodies using electrofishing gear, and our winter gill net sampling. So we were able to gather good information as far as abundance and community change using that information. So that's some of the things that we're actively doing as far as research goes. We work on educating the public. One way by doing that is through the use of our agency website. I'll show a slide here in just a second that kind of describes that a little bit more. Also through public interactions. We're out in the field quite a bit, and we run into fishermen and just general people who are interested in the fisheries, and most of the time it's people who like to be out on our lakes and enjoy a leisurely day boating or skiing or fishing, and they, like I said, they ask us all the time, what are we doing about silver carp? And so we're able to, give them information if they or if people who decide they want to get into harvesting Asian carp, who they can contact, things like that. We have this fact card to the right. This is just a general overview of how to compare the two different types of two different types of Asian carp, big head and silver, and how to identify those, and if you see them, what to kind of do if you notice them, and be able to report to us. We host a few different Asian carp workshops. One we had at Enid Fish Hatchery, or at our North Mississippi Fish Hatchery in Enid. We had a pretty good turnout there. And then we've given a few presentations at some of our Rotary clubs that have called us up. Back to our website, this is a picture of what our website looks like. If you go to mdwfp.com under fishing and boating and go to freshwater commercial, this is a page, and what this helps to do is people who are interested in Asian carp, they can look at this, they can figure out if they decide to consume it, if they decide to, they want to eat Asian carp. This gives a few videos on how to prepare the fish for consumption, and also for people who may be interested in getting into harvesting Asian carp to make money at it, who they can contact. We have both Protein Products and Moon River Foods on there and their contact information. So as far as stopping the expansion, we know that these fish can travel great distances. I think Quentin said in his presentation over a short period of time that they had a fish travel 400 miles. So this is a picture of what the silver carp distribution looked like in 2008, and this is in 2015. You can see their expansion. They multiply rather quickly. I've heard people call silver carp the wild hog of the Mississippi River. And so what are we really doing to kind of stop that expansion? Well, one thing that we're working on right now is establishing an agency rule to regulate the transportation of live bait. I know several fishermen who like to use young of the year silver carp as catfish bait for flathead catfish. And then also we already have in place the Lacey Act, which prohibits the transportation of live Asian carp across state lines. The Lacey Act actually focuses in on specific species, and Asian carp species fall in underneath that. We also have a rule that's in place that prohibits the stock and release of non-native species in the public and private waterways. So this is just a small way that we can stop the expansion through regulatory efforts. We encourage harvest. We try to connect fishermen with people like Moon River or Protein Products that they can, once, it gives them an outlet to their bycatch of Asian carp, that they can get these fish out of their hands, because the general public doesn't buy Asian carp like they would buffalo or catfish. And so we try to connect those fishermen with another way to sell their product. Most of the ways that Asian carp are harvested are through their conventional gears, which are gill nets, which we found that 3.5 to 4 inch mesh gill nets probably work the best for as far as a greater amount of harvest. The use of trammel nets and hoop nets. These are your conventional gear types as far as catching Asian carp. As far as unconventional gears, we're trying to think outside the box here, and this is where Moon River Foods has really stepped up to the plate and came up to us with some ideas. I'm going to get into the type of gear that they use, but first I want to give you a little bit of background about Moon River, who was gracious enough to supply us with fish for lunch today. Moon River Foods is a fairly early business here in Mississippi that it's still in their development stages. They purchased an old catfish plant in Baird, Mississippi, which is right outside of Indianola, and they are a fish export and business, and they also have the capability of producing surimi. For those of you who don't know what surimi is, it's a fish paste. They render the fish down into a paste, and that paste can be made into thousands of things, but most of the time it's made into, or can be made into artificial crab meat. I'm not sure of any place in the U.S. that serves silver carp as artificial crab meat at this point in time. So for those of you who like your artificial crab meat, it's probably not silver carp at this point. But it could soon be. It could soon be. But they've invested millions of dollars in setting up this plant. We've had several people come to our department wanting, with several ideas on or business plans. Most of them looking for investors. Moon River came to us and said, "Look, we've got a business plan. We've got investors. We just need fish." So we worked with connecting them to fishermen and helping them get those fish. So what they do is like this picture on the left is their surimi equipment. This huge machine can render a silver carp down into a package of surimi. And Moon River is able to produce 250,000 pounds of surimi in one day, given that they have enough fish to do that. And it's just silver carp that they use to produce surimi. Other species such as bighead carp, buffalo, they will process and prepare for exporting whole. They'll gut it and then they'll flash freeze those fish and then package them and put them in these storage containers until they're ready for export. They have a huge storage warehouse that is extremely cold. It is held at negative 14 degrees. And it's a huge warehouse full of fish ready for export. So back to their unconventional gears, they came to us because they have they're able to process so much surimi in a day. 250,000 pounds is a lot of silver carp, especially for one day. And so just having your commercial fishermen bring you fish, there's not enough commercial fishermen in the state of Mississippi to do that for 250,000 pounds of silver carp a day, I don't believe. And so, we're thinking outside the box here. And this is a type of gear that is used in China on the Yangtze River to harvest silver carp. And it's called a stabilized seine. It's kind of a labyrinth idea where you have a perpendicular lead. So this will be the bank, and the perpendicular lead comes from the bank, and the fish will swim into these little openings where they reach this holding area. And from there, they will swim into either hoop. There's two hoops on each end of this net. So it's about 40 yards in width, and the lead can be anywhere from 40 to 50 yards long. So this is what they call the stabilized seine. At each one of these points, there's a pole that is driven into the ground, and I'll show you in just a minute. This type of gear is not a one-man setup. It takes several people. They use 2 boats to set it out, and it takes manpower to push these poles into the ground so that they can stake this net down. And it's unlike any other type of net where you would use a float line and a lead line. The reason you put these stakes in the ground is because this net has to sit above the water. Once a silver carp gets in, or Asian carp gets into this net, it could potentially jump out. So that's why they use the stakes so that they can raise the stake at least 3 feet, or the net at least 3 feet above the water. So once they get it all set up, which takes a fairly decent amount of time, this is what you have out in the lake or out in the river. And we've, as an agency, we've issued special permits for the use of this gear, and we've monitored it very closely. And so we've been out there when they've set it and when they've ran the net, making sure that there's no risk of sports fish capture or anything. And so once they set the net, they go out and they'll run it. And once the design of this net is the only thing on it you have to check essentially is the hoop nets on both ends. So it does take a while to set it out, but it's relatively easy once you get ready to check it. You just check 2 hoops. And so this is a few pictures of them checking the nets. And I hope this next slide works. This is a video of them harvesting fish from one of the hoops. I'm going to see if I can turn the volume down somewhat. I don't want to blast your ears. So let's try this. I think this net right here, I think just in one hoop net there was 30-something big head carp and 1 or 2 buffalo. But it took 4 guys to get that one hoop net in the boat. So this is one thing that I really, this is a table that I want to show to y'all, and this is just showing the number of fish harvested by the species. And what I want you to look at is this net catches almost exclusively big head and silver carp. There are some buffalo harvested, but as far as carp go, this net catches almost exclusively Asian carp now, which is great. Now, one thing I do want to make note of is this table doesn't show the number of nets that they've set or the time period in which the nets were set, and so this is a total harvest from multiple nets over an extended period of time. So I think it's important to note that this type of gear works very well, possibly in certain times of the years in particular locations. I don't foresee one commercial fisherman trying to set this net out, and so this is a type of gear that would probably be used by a company like Moon River. But it does show us that there are other techniques as far as harvesting Asian carp, and to kind of keep an open mind about unconventional capture techniques. This is another method that I don't have any data for because this is a new type of gear. I call it the box trap net, but this is one net that we just set out on the Sunflower River, and notice that all it is it's a box trap with a single hoop on one end and a short lead that runs to the bank. And then there is a very long lead that runs down the center of the river. And it's set up just like the stabilized seine. It's out of the water. And they will drive fish from downstream into this portion and then driving the silver carp on in. And by driving the fish, they're beating, they're banging, they're making noise to drive the fish into this net. Like I said, I don't have any data at this point in time to tell whether or not this is going to be an effective method or not. But like I said, it's another unconventional technique as far as harvesting Asian carp. Moving on to establishing markets, the Asian market, we know it's already there. There's such a high demand for Asian carp in China that, like they said earlier, they're stocking. They're raising them in hatcheries, and now that we have businesses up and down the Mississippi River that are exporting Asian carp back to China. What we need to work on is developing a market here in the United States. And one thing that MDWP has part of is we assist business developers, people that, like I said, people that come to us with these new ideas and connecting them with the fishermen, giving them information that we've gathered in the past, what works, what doesn't work, and try to help them developing new businesses, as well as working with the Mississippi Development Authority to get new businesses going. We haven't in particularly worked with renaming the fish, but other states have. There's a guy in Louisiana who's trying to rename them silverfin, and that seems to be working down there. And in Kentucky, they're working on renaming it as Kentucky whitefish. I was told that in China, Kentucky Fried Chicken is favored by many, and so by renaming it Kentucky Whitefish, this may be a way to increase the buyer. So that is really what it's really hard as an agency to work on establishing markets, but that's about as much as we can do at this time. And then working with other agencies and private entities, we do research for the LMRCC, and we help with any research that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has at Mississippi State. And we really have been, working with Moon River quite a bit, helping them out as far as giving them special permits for these unconventional gears, and then trying to get people to take their product to Moon River and protein products. And so I think the only way that we can really move forward is by working together. We had some questions earlier about what can we do to get rid of these Asian carp, and a show of hands, how many people had the Asian carp for lunch? How many people ate silver carp? Most of you. See people here, y'all are really interested in the Asian carp, but there's a lot of people out there that would turn their nose up to it. And I think one of the main ways that we can get rid of them, I think they're here to stay, but we can work on enticing people to try them, eat them. Seems to work in China. So with that, I'll take any questions.